Welcome to Agatha Christie She Watched, our spoiler-heavy look at the movie and TV adaptations of the mystery genre's greatest writer. I'm Bill Peschel of Peschel Press, publisher of the annotated novels of Agatha Christie, and today we're talking about Weird Wills, Catholic ballet dancers, panting painters, and spying servants. It's the 1987 Miss Marple TV episode 450 from Paddington, starring the great Joan Hickson. But first, let me introduce my partner in marriage as well as crime of the fictional kind, Teresa Peschel. Hello, Teresa. How you doing?
Hi, love. It's just so nice to be in your little office under the stairs and not have to go outside. Freezing rain today, folks, mixed with sleet and graupel and snow and hail and every other kind of nasty thing that can come out of the sky and be cold. Oh, graupel.
What's
graupel? Is a kind of, it's a form of precipitation. It's not snow. It's not sleet. It's not hail. It is kind of like little hard pellets of snow, but it doesn't fit the definition of hail.
Fascinating. I didn't know that. Amazing the things you learn after 30 years of marriage.
But yes, we're here snug and relatively warm. We'll be warmer when the furnace kicks in, but we're relatively snug and relatively warm in the little office under the stairs, and we have absolutely nothing to do with what's going on outside, and we didn't have to leave the house, and I'm so grateful.
And I am too. I've had years of going out in Pennsylvania winters to the newspaper, so I can sit out. There have been times when the snow has come down really heavy, and I would set up the cardboard table and the laptop by the front window so I can write and then look out and go, I don't have to drive in that. I don't have to shovel that. Life is good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Which actually lets me segue very nicely into the 450 from Paddington, because I did notice again, I know that this is a function of the filmmaking industry, but you know, there are no seasons. There are no weather. There's almost never any weather in any of the Agatha Christie productions we have ever seen. I can count on the fingers of one hand the times we have seen snow, and that is solely because the novel called for it. And almost never rain, and it's either because the novel called for it or because it actually rained during their filming schedule. It is always summer in an Agatha Christie TV production or an Agatha Christie film. I have no idea why. You never see a miserable, cold, damp English winter where the cold seeps into your bones. I mean, I don't think it sleets in England unless you get pretty far north. I guess it does. But
I'm sure it does.
But
that far north, yeah.
But you never see the miserable cold weather where everybody is bundled up to the nines, with their mackinaws on and their heavy gum boots and their umbrellas and their mufflers and their scarves. You just don't see that. So we watched the 450 and it's a sunny, beautiful day. It's relatively sunny. It's a lovely weather. There's no rain, and yet everything is green and lush. So it must have rained at some point. And I go upstairs and look out the front window. Everything is encased in ice and more coming down. And think, it's time to go back to England, where apparently, at least according to Agatha Christie movies, the weather is never bad.
Well, remember, it's also in the musical Camelot, where the rain never falls till after sundown, and by noon the morning fog must disappear. And in short, there's simply not a more beautiful spot for happy ever aftering than here in Camelot.
I suppose we're going to have to watch that movie because, I don't think I've ever seen it.
I remember it from a long time ago. So, yes, I don't know if I'd really want to see it again, because I remember seeing it on HBO and it was like 2.5 hours. And I was just like, I was ready to fall asleep and be sent to the Isle of Avalon, because that was way too much King Arthur for me. Eventually, we'll get to the 450 from Paddington.
Eventually, folks, I swear.
This is part of our branding, is going off on tangents whenever we need to. This is the second time we've gone through. We're nearing the end of the Agatha Christie project, so this is the second time we've seen this episode, because we saw it early in the cycle and we didn't quite get the review that we wanted out of it, so we're seeing it again.
And it was really enjoyable to watch it a second time, even though it has been probably 2 years since we watched this. And I was surprised at how much of it I remembered. And I did understand it a little bit better seeing it the second time, but man, I really wished for subtitles. I really did, because there were lines of dialogue that I completely missed. Actors, actresses, please don't mumble when you speak in front of a camera. Please don't. Not all of us can understand what you were saying or what you were emoting, and your acting isn't good enough. No one's acting is good enough to explain some deep thought. Even in silent movies where you have people who are experienced at acting without words, they still have title cards in order to say what it is that you were supposed to be, what emotion you're supposed to be putting forth. So there were things that I know that I missed. But it was fun. I enjoyed it. The one flaw I would have is, besides that, I still don't know how Miss Marple came to the solution. I can see the logic behind her solution, but only because I've read so many other Agatha Christie's. I think the reason why Miss Marple was able to pull the solution out of her knitting bag was because of what she didn't say, which is the murderer had to be someone who was on the spot. Agatha actually spelled this out in Sleeping Murder. When Miss Marple tells Gwenda when they were looking for X, X had to be there. And I think that this might have been where the solution came from, even though it's not spelled out in the text or spelled out in any of the movie versions that we've seen, and we've seen 3 so far, that the murderer had to be somebody who was there, who was familiar with Rutherford Hall. So you strangle someone on the train and you shove the body out the window, and I would have thought it would have left more traces, blood or something like that as you're going down the embankment. Then as soon as you get off the train, because of course nobody will have reported this, you get off the train and then you go back over to where the body should have fallen. You pick up the body, and again, I can't believe that you wouldn't have left any crumpled grass or shrubbery or broken down branches or something. You pick up the body, and then you need to hide the body, and so happen to know that there is Rutherford Hall, here's the wonderful embankment, and with the dense wood around it, no witnesses, and you haul the body to the big barn that is filled with antiquities, one of which is a huge sarcophagus, so you can put the body in the sarcophagus and never pay attention to it again, because nobody is ever going to look inside that.
Yeah.
When you think about it logically, who could possibly know this? And the answer is only someone connected to the Krakenthorpe family.
Either the family themselves or, like you said, someone connected to the family.
Someone connected to the family. Since we are not seeing the immense range of servants who would actually have to be present in order to run that enormous pile, that leaves us with Luther Krakenthorpe, who is too old to be doing this, too old and feeble to be doing this. Women generally don't strangle other women, so that kind of lets Emma out. And that leaves you with Cedric, who's on an island somewhere out in the Mediterranean. Ibiza?
Yeah, I think so.
Ibiza? I'm not sure how you say that word.
Ibiza, probably.
Ibiza?
Yeah.
That's one of those islands that people like us only get to go to if we're this part of the cleanup crew. So Cedric is out. Then there is Harold in the city, Alfred in the city doing various things, and Emma, who is there and who's probably not going to strangle someone. So if you aren't there at the right time, you're kind of left out of the loop. And then there is the doctor. And the doctor is there at Krakenthorpe Hall on a near daily basis, and he is pursuing Emma. It is obvious to anybody with eyes that he is pursuing Emma. Lucy Islesborough notices, and of course she tells Miss Marple, and Miss Marple goes out and sees with her own eyes that obviously the doctor and Emma want to marry, and you come to this thought of, if everyone else dies, Emma inherits more money. So who is the person who benefits? Like I said, I can see the logical thought, but it wasn't spelled out in the novel or any of the films. If the doctor is here, he's familiar with the layout, he's familiar with the history of the family because Emma would have told him. He is a local person, so he knows exactly how the trains run locally. He wants to marry Emma. If Emma's siblings die mysteriously, she'll inherit more money. And then eventually he can marry Emma and live happily ever after in the giant house, and the body of his first wife, because you can't marry someone else if you're already married, is quietly moldering away in the sarcophagus, and no one will ever know.
Right. Marple does make the deduction that the victim, Anna, she knew or was suspecting that Anna had married, who was it?
They thought originally Edmund.
Edmund, oh right,
The oldest, the dead brother, the brother who died at Dunkirk.
Right, the dead brother, and that she's coming there to claim her stake in the family fortune. But if that wasn't the case, because remember, they looked into that, they asked Edmund's brother officers and assumed that if Edmund had gotten married, they would have talked about it. And they said, we never heard anything about this. So Miss Marple said, if Anna hadn't married him, who could she have married? And that led to the visit to Somerset House, which in England is where all the birth certificates and marriage certificates are stored.
So she looks up Martine's name, her real name.
Her real name, Martine, right.
And what does she find? She discovers that Martine married Dr. Quimper.
Right. And they could have checked by her name, or she could have just said, is there anything for Dr. Quimper? Is there anything for Luther Krakenthorpe or Harold Krakenthorpe or Alfred?
Or Cedric, to see if any of them had married and then lied about it.
Right.
Because Somerset House shows up regularly in English murder mysteries. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, it is a big, grand mansion. And it's where they put all the records.
Yep.
You see it regularly. Did you check Somerset House to see if someone is married to someone else, or to check the actual date on a birth certificate, the date on a death certificate?
You can also check wills, because we've had that in a couple of mysteries where they've gone down to look at probated wills to find out what it says.
Yes, after the will is probated, you're allowed to do that, but not before the will is probated, because it's made public when it's probated.
Which led to that wonderful scene with the solicitor, Arthur Wimborne, where Miss Marple's trying to figure out, or is it the detective? Was it the detective?
No, this is the lawyer. This is Miss Marple is at the lawyer's office, Arthur Wimborne, because she happens to remember his christening, and so she knows him because Miss Marple knows everyone. He tells her in a roundabout way the heart of the will, which is that it is a tontine. It's not exactly a tontine, and in a way it's more like an American will, where you have a certain number of beneficiaries, and if one of the beneficiaries dies, then the money is divided up into larger shares for each of the surviving beneficiaries. It's not exactly a tontine.
At its heart, a tontine is one person takes all.
Yes, the survivor gets it all.
The survivor gets it all. And a will shouldn't necessarily be set up like that, because the will is probated when the person dies, and you have to do something with the money then. Or is it, I guess maybe they set it up so that it delivers shares to everybody, but it's not until there's only one survivor that person gets the whole pot to do with as they want.
And maybe that's what they were looking at. But in the end, what's happening is, because Luther, the old man's father despised his son, who was a ne'er-do-well and a dilettante and a collector of dubious artworks, which is why he has a barn full of what looks like rejects from a Sword and Sandal movie set decorations. And maybe they reused those for the Poirot Mystery of the Egyptian Tomb mystery.
Charles Foster Kane's attic.
Yeah, Charles Foster Kane's attic. They had a ton of junk in there.
Right.
So the old man didn't want his son to inherit. He didn't want his son to inherit the estate. He didn't want his son to inherit the money. And what he did is he set the will up in such a way that Luther had the right to live in Rutherford Hall and had access to an allowance. But the bulk of the capital and the hall itself and all of the lands he could not touch. The money was divided up among the old man's grandchildren, Luther's children, and their great-grandchildren, but only one of them reproduced, and that would be Edie, who is also dead. Her son is Alexander, and his father is Brian Eastley, the former RAF pilot. So you have these people who, when Luther dies, then the oldest son will get Rutherford Hall, and the money will be divided up among the five of them. So by the time it's finished, Cedric's going to inherit Rutherford Hall, and he's going to split the money with Emma and with Alexander, who is the only great-grandchild. 3 people will be very rich, and Cedric will hopefully have enough money to maintain that enormous pile. And so you can see the rationale behind this. You see Dr. Quimper, that he sees Emma Krakenthorpe, whom he seems to genuinely care for.
Mm-hmm.
You get the feeling that he genuinely cares for her, and he can have everything that he wants. He can marry Emma. He can inherit an enormous pile of money. He can get rid of unpleasant brothers-in-law, which would be Harold and Alfred. Cedric would have probably been next. And all he has to do is get rid of an inconvenient wife. So you get money and passion here.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, none of this logic was spelled out. All Miss Marple knew, the only thing that we're told, is that it had to be somebody familiar with Rutherford Hall and someone who is on the spot, someone who has a reason for killing someone else. And there aren't very many suspects after that. When you start eliminating everybody who doesn't fit one of those strictures, you aren't left with very many people. But still, this should be spelled out.
Yeah. This is also the episode with the wonderful character Lucy Islesborough.
She is a modern woman. Remember, Agatha wrote this in the late 50s.
1957.
And Lucy Islesborough, she comes from a reasonably well-to-do but very erudite family. Her family, her brothers and uncles and aunts and so forth, they are philosophers, they are artists, they are writers, they're people of the mind. And they do have some money, and she decided that she was not going to go to university and be another philosopher. She was actually going to make money, and she is a super high-end emergency housekeeper, the kind of person who can move into your mansion, take over, and run it like clockwork so you can do what you need to do. She is very highly paid, and in fact, Miss Marple tells someone else that Lucy makes more money than anyone else in her family. And she does it by cleaning people's houses, by being the best.
Organizing them, not just cleaning them, but
she runs the household.
She's cooking, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was doing the cooking there, too. I did not see any cook in that cast, even though we have somebody listed, Mrs. Kidder Cook. I didn't see anybody in that kitchen besides Lucy, unless it was a servant in the background.
Yeah.
It looked to me like Lucy was doing the cooking. It's so irritating when I watch these episodes, and you've got this castle with no staff. I guarantee you that at least 10 women come up from the village every day to dust and sweep, because that place is so big, one person cannot possibly clean it by themselves. It's like painting a bridge. You start at one end of the bridge and go all the way to the other end, and by the time you reach the far end of the bridge, you have to start again at the beginning of the bridge. These places, you are never done with washing windows, with cleaning draperies, with beating carpets. You are never finished. So I guarantee you, even though you do not see servants in the background, they are there.
Yeah, and Emma is the one who's answering the door frequently as well. It's like they don't have a butler there.
Luther Krakenthorpe is a difficult and unpleasant old man, and as a direct result, they have trouble keeping staff, which is why Miss Marple, when she did a little research by asking the right questions, she knew that they would say to Lucy Islesborough, You want to come here? Oh, yes, thank you. Please, can you start tomorrow?
She still had to come up with an answer to, why did you want to come here? And she said, well, you have a large lawn and I need to work on my golf shots.
And she does.
Which also allows her to roam the grounds and search for
clues that the police should have found if they actually searched the rail lines.
Yeah.
Because I just can't believe that they wouldn't have seen. I'm looking at this slope. And I do actually know something about what happens with forbs and other vegetation. When you throw a body down an embankment, it's going to leave a trail behind because you're going to break grass, you're going to break bushes. And when you beat your way up there with your machete, pushing your way through the bushes to find the body halfway down the embankment and then dragging it behind you, even if you do it as a fireman's carry over your shoulder, you're going to leave a trail. It is impossible to walk through waist-high vegetation without leaving a trail.
I prefer to believe that they looked at the old woman's story about seeing a strangulation on the train and they just kind of wandered through. They didn't really do one of those line of coppers beating the bushes very carefully. They kind of gave it a lick and a polish. And
well,
said,
I'm sure you're right. But
there, but
I'm sure you're right. But then there we are with Lucy Islesborough, who's a very competent person, and she is looking up the slope of the embankment to the train, and that path should have been clear. That would be a very easy to spot desire path.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, just from the broken leaves, scattered leaves and stuff. And she finds a little bit of fluff.
A tiny bit of fur from the lady's fur coat.
Very good
That's
eyes.
all she finds. No, there would be broken grass and sticks and twigs and stuff knocked around. An amateur would miss it because amateurs don't know what they're looking at. But any trained policeman or somebody who was looking for something different, for something out of the way, you stand back and you look at the slope of grass and you think, that looks different. Think about lawns. When you see people who are very elaborate with their lawn mowing, and so they're very, very careful about how they go in stripes, and so they make the grass in patterns by the angle of the lawnmower because they cut first in one direction and then the stripe next to it is cut in the other direction. And you can see this. And this is just because 3-inch high grass is mowed in the other direction. If you can see that, believe me, on a grassy embankment, if somebody throws a body down the embankment, you will know.
Well, this is not just grass. I mean, this is overgrown. This is like when we walk by the Reese factory on the road. There's all kinds of vegetation that are growing up. So a body that's rolling down should be knocking them down.
Oh, yeah, knocking them down and bits of stuff everywhere. I mean, we pick up trash along the side of the road. And I recommend folks when you go out walking that you take a plastic bag with you and pick up trash because somebody has to do it. Just reaching in to get a piece of trash, you're going to knock stuff around. You're going to break up the brambles. It's just the way it is. And I think that people who don't go out there and walk through the woods, through meadows and things like that, they don't realize that you're going to have that happen. I remember being at Longwood Gardens out in the meadow, and you could see where the deer pushed their way through the meadow because they made an obvious, visible trail. I mean, not all the way down to the ground, but you could see that the grass had been disturbed. You could recognize a game trail.
Getting back to Lucy, because she is a fun character here, because she has so much to do besides stalking the grounds, looking for the body. She's having to deal with the attentions from Brian Eastley, the fighter pilot, and Cedric.
And Cedric, the Loesch painter. And oh my God, I mean, he's the very definition of Loesch. The way he
look
looks,
at him.
Yes, the way he looks, the way he dresses, the way he talks, the way he sidles up next to you and says something sly and insinuating and just on the verge of being improper. Oh my God. Yes, and absolutely. Loesch is the only word.
Yes, and later in the episode, he actually kisses her. And you and I were discussing this. How enthusiastic was she? What is her response to this? She is washing dishes.
And he's been chasing her since he arrived.
And he is, looking at her and crooning sweet nothings and then sidles up behind her while she's washing.
And she turns and he kisses her and she lets him. And I watched this with a lot of interest because here we are watching this the second time. I know how the story goes. This is Lucy Islesborough. If she didn't want this, she'd have reared back and she'd have slapped him into next week. And probably kneed him in the groin afterwards. But she didn't. But she wasn't enthusiastic either. She was stiff. She wasn't passionate. There was no attraction. It was almost as though, fine, I'm kissing you to see what happens next, and I'm kissing you to see what happens next because I'm actually on a secret mission from Miss Marple, and I can't slap you into next week like you deserve. And I don't know if Brian Eastley, former fighter pilot, is going to walk in the kitchen because we have seen him in the kitchen with Lucy being helpful along with his son.
Right.
And, of course, Brian walks in and sees them, and Lucy pushes Cedric away.
And Cedric backs away as well, and he goes off whistling past him. And we should have looked that up because it sounded like you knew what he was whistling.
It sounded to me like he was whistling the Teddy Bear's Picnic. You're going to have to fire up the music from the Teddy Bear's Picnic to see if I'm right. But I am sure that they chose something recognizable.
Right.
They wouldn't have written a little piece of music just for the episode.
Not for him to whistle. It has some significance, but not an all-important significance. It was just a little fillip, like people will nudge each other and go...
Is he whistling the Teddy Bear's Picnic? I'm not going to sing it into the microphone, for which everyone should be very grateful.
And I don't remember it. I don't remember anything about it, except that I know it exists, and it's just a very strange
little song. It's a very strange little song about all the teddy bears in the woods having their picnic. And it's very cute, and I have no idea why anybody wrote that.
Yeah.
But It was strange to watch Lucy Islesborough, how she was kissing Cedric, because she didn't look enthusiastic.
Yeah.
And you know she is so capable, and she has probably had gentlemen of the house come on to her before, and she knows exactly what to do with them. And she didn't. Did she let him kiss her because she was kind of attracted to Cedric? And embrace the power of "and" here. She was attracted to Cedric because he is attractive in a kind of
rough trade way.
Well, I wouldn't say rough trade, but as part, I guess it was the scarf. You know, the artistic scarf and artistic clothes make him look less like rough trade.
And
you're right.
The beautiful voice, but he has kind of heavy jowls. He's not the pretty boy like Brian.
Yes, he's not a
Brian
pretty boy.
Was just this pretty boy. He should have been on
looked like a spaniel.
Dan Dare
He looked like a
comic book
spaniel.
cover.
Yes, he looked like a spaniel next to a Rottweiler.
And yeah. And Cedric is talking about come fly with me to the island.
Oh, so seductive,
and let's face it,
so
you're in England,
attractive.
You think a summer island, you know,
and
Sunset
at the same
Island
time, Lucy Islesborough, remember, either the author or the scriptwriter could have done a lot more fleshing out. But she has relatives who are artists.
Right.
You don't know if she is thinking on some level, no matter how attractive this man is, he's going to have a string of mistresses, he's going to get drunk, he's not going to produce anything of value, and why am I wasting my time? I have a very practical, common sense woman, which is why she went into the career path that she did. She is loaded with practical common sense, and practical common sense women do not marry loesch painters, even if it sounds like they're going to inherit, because all that money is going to be frittered away very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, Brian walks in on them, is very upset to see Cedric encroaching on his territory. And remember, he has already demonstrated that he is going to walk into that kitchen and help Lucy out without being asked. He is the only person in that household who does this.
In fact, there was a little bit of byplay the previous time when Brian was helping out, and Cedric comes in deliberately late. Can I help? Oh, it's already done. Oh, too bad.
Yes.
Yeah, we know what you're thinking, Cedric.
Yes, we know what kind of a man you are. You are going to promise more than you deliver.
That's right.
Brian walks in on them and then decides, I'm going to have to tell the truth. And so he goes to the police and tells them that whatever Cedric told you, I saw him at the airfield in London because I was delivering a plane. He was in London a day earlier than what he told you. And what was Cedric doing? Why, he was banging someone's wife. Heading towards a hotel room.
In a hotel.
And you get again this loesch attitude of, well, I could tell you what it was that I was doing, but I think you can figure this out.
Pornographic, actually, I think popped up there.
Yeah, the word pornographic. It would be pornographic for me to tell you what I was doing. Right. And Lucy hears this and
overhears this because she's outside they're setting up, I think, in the stables.
Yeah, they're in the stable doing interrogations.
Doing their interrogations, and she's outside the door, her ears flapping.
But none of what Cedric said should have surprised her.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You're talking, this is artists in
He's
the
an
late
artist.
50s. Of course they're going to do this. It would be a surprise if they didn't.
That's for sure. And even though, Brian Eastley can seem soft, there's a reason why he has medals from the RAF.
That's right. He has a confirmed number of kills because he was a fighter pilot. His son vouches for him and shows Lucy the medals, a DSO and a DSC, a Distinguished Service Organization Distinguished Service Cross.
And I think, doesn't Alexander say that Dad won them, each of them, at least twice? Something like that.
That might have been because he talks about, I think there's like little
pips.
Like pips or leaves on them. Yeah, so he's definitely a brave fighter pilot.
This is something that shows up fairly often in Christie novels after the war. The war brought out the best in them. What they needed to do, they were the right men for the right time, but they couldn't necessarily adapt to peacetime because their temperament, their skill set, what you needed to be a warrior is not what you need to be a greengrocer.
Right.
It's just a different skill set. And most men were able to make the transition, but some never did. So you actually have this love triangle with Lucy Islesborough, Brian Eastley, and Cedric. And in the novel, it's left up in the air who she's going to choose. Miss Marple knows, of course, but she doesn't tell you. But here, Miss Marple actually spells it out.
Very amusingly,
very
too,
amusingly.
I must say.
Yes.
This is one of those things you miss on the second hearing. You go, oh, yeah, I remember that now.
Yes, that Lucy is going to marry Brian, that She's going to make him the man that he could be. He's the common sense one to marry. She can make him into the man that he should be, and by the time she has her third child, then she will fall madly and passionately in love with him.
By the third child, which is, wow. This is why you got to listen to women talk. They say things like, just like, scorch your ears.
And the thing is that Miss Marple is looking at this, and I remember there was in Sad Cyprus, Poirot actually tells the doctor about Eleanor. Yes, she loved him. What of it? With you, she will be happy.
Yeah.
You can see that if Lucy Islesborough were to marry Cedric, you get 5 little pigs. And if she marries Brian Eastley, she'll be happy. And she doesn't have the right temperament to marry someone who is going to cheat on her right and left.
Yeah.
That's exactly what Cedric would do. We already know this. The implication is very clear. I mean, he comes on to her right away, and he has no qualms whatsoever about discussing the fact of, yeah, I was with a married woman in a hotel room the day before I admitted arriving because I had the chance to get laid, to have a fun afternoon, an afternoon delight, and I did. So what? A common sense, practical woman, unless she is absolutely head over heels, that's bad husband material.
That's the one you have the fling with, and then you settle for the Brian Eastleys.
Who is still more of a hero. Because when the chips were down and Dr. Quimper was accused and then raced out, Brian Eastley risked his life to stop it. What did Cedric do? Hid in the background where no one would see him.
That's right. Goofus and gallant.
And maybe it wasn't the smart thing to do, but it was the brave thing to do.
Well, this is what he's made to do. This is what Brian is made to do. And this is, again, this refers to the veterans who were placed in danger, responded to danger, could give and receive orders. And I think that's the big thing, is that in military life, it doesn't matter who you are. It's the bars that you have on your shoulders that's doing the talking. In the civilian world, because I actually worked with someone who was in the Army and had served in Vietnam and all that, and he ended up actually going back into the National Guard full time, because in civilian world, the lines of communication are difficult, the lines of authority can be vague, you have to moderate yourself, and it didn't suit him.
And maybe that's why Brian Eastley really will become a huge force in shipping packages in the package shipment world, because Lucy will say, I want you to do X, and he'll do it.
Yeah.
And he'll succeed because he wants to succeed.
Yeah.
And he has a clear understanding of what he's supposed to do, and he'll do it. It's not vague like selling insurance, which he is failing at.
Right. And if he's running his own company, then he can run it his way, and it will be, you do what I tell you to do, or else I will just fire you. And
with Lucy taking care of the books, he'll be very successful.
He'll be very successful.
He'll be very successful, and he'll be able to fly, which he absolutely loves doing.
Right.
And she'll tell him to succeed, and he will.
There are 2 450s from Paddington, the ITV version and this version. Of course, there was the Miss Marple version as well, which wasn't called 450. Was it Murder, She Said?
Murder, She Said. That was Margaret Rutherford.
Margaret Rutherford.
There's this one, the Joan Hickson one. There's the one with Geraldine McEwen, done with ITV's Marple, and they made a lot more changes to the storyline than this did, by God. Then you have the Margaret Rutherford, which played really fast and loose with the storyline. There is no Lucy Islesborough because Margaret Rutherford took all of that part, as well as Miss Marple, and moved in undercover, and there's some very funny scenes in there. But there's also a 450 from Paddington with the Japanese animation series.
Right.
Because we had 2 novels to choose from, and I chose Sleeping Murder because 450 had been done several times. And I think that there is a Japanese live action one, the 450, and I think they did it as a police procedural, I think.
I think you're correct, and we couldn't get that one. We couldn't get that one with an English subtitles.
Yes, which is really a shame, because the Japanese films that we've seen of Agatha Christie have been really outstanding.
Yeah.
They have just been wonderful. So there's a lot of versions of 450. For those of you who are following along at home, in the United States, for whatever mysterious reason, they call the novel What Mrs. McGillicuddy Saw. So that is If you're wondering why What Mrs. McGillicuddy Saw was never filmed, it was, but it was always filmed as the English title, the 450, and that's going to be that's one of the weirdnesses of watching the films, is that you may know a novel under one title, but the film has a different title.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get Lord Edgware Dies and 13 at Dinner. You'll get films under both titles.
Right.
Which is just very strange.
It's going to make indexing this a lot of fun. When we publish Agatha Christie She Watched, I'll be doing the index for this. So we're going to have a lot of
long, boring talks.
Long, boring talk. Well, a lot of searching through alternative titles to make sure that they're all listed. So you look up What Mrs. McGillicuddy Saw, you'll be directed to the 450 from Paddington, which I guess they did because it's a very British way of, Paddington Station is not Paddington Bear, and 450 is usually with a dot. That's how they would do times over there. So it's 4.50 from Paddington, and to American readers, it's considered too confusing.
But I have to say, What Mrs. McGillicuddy Saw is still a better title than the 450 from Paddington, because the 450 from Paddington says, oh, I guess trains are involved.
Yeah.
But What Mrs. McGillicuddy Saw
asks a question
like, why didn't they ask Evans, which I think is still one of the best titles that Agatha ever got. I enjoyed this, and like I said, this is where the scriptwriter could have done a better job of fleshing out why Miss Marple arrived at the deduction that she did. It's there in the text, but it's never spelled out. Agatha never spelled it out, and it's never spelled out in any of the films that I've seen, but I think that this is the rationale.
Right.
You have to pick the person on the spot who knows what's going on and who benefits from the murder. And there aren't that many people in that category.
I have to mention one more thing. I forgot about this. Is there's the wonderful byplay between Miss Marple and Detective Slack.
Oh, Inspector poor Slack, Inspector Slack.
Because also there is, who was it? Chief Inspector Duckham?
Yes.
From Scotland Yard.
And who shows up, and he's so gung-ho on Miss Marple, and there's Detective Inspector Slack rolling his eyes. And
Duckham says, you've got to include her in the case. She will tell you which way to do, what to do next and which way to go. She knows a lot about the locals, and you're having to watch Slack, and you can tell he's biting back what he wants to say and just going, yes, sir. I will, sir.
And later on, you get this lovely scene where you think, oh, so that's what it looks like when you're eating crow. And there's poor Detective Inspector Slack. That's and right, gradually, over time, he does warm to Miss Marple. He does warm to Miss Marple. You see Detective Inspector Slack, and he is nothing like his name. He is not a slack man in any way. But you do see him gradually warming up to her over the course of the episodes if you watch them in the order in which they were released.
And this is very important to note, I think, from an acting point of view, because Joan Hickson really plays Miss Marple as a little bit of a stringent. She has this bird-like gaze at everything, that she's not revealing what she's thinking. She doesn't look like a maternal type of grandmother. She is very...
Mrs. McGillicuddy is much more maternal looking.
Oh gosh, yes. And the later Marples as well. They're a little bit more youthful. They're a little more fleshed out. They look like they could smile more often. And Miss Marple does not smile very much. But she is also very direct. She tells you what she thinks, and she is very good at seeing through people. And that can be a little bit off-putting if you don't know her. But as like you said, as time went on, Detective Inspector Slack warmed up to her and understood her little ways, and that she was also a very good investigator, very good deducer.
Very much so. There were some other odd bits that I thought were clumsily handled. I'm looking at my cast list here and how Harold Krakenthorpe dies.
Oh,
and in the novel, he was poisoned. Dr. Quimper poisoned him. But here, he gets shot.
He's out hunting.
He's out hunting, and he's shot. And then they find his leg in an old bear trap. I guess the idea is that Dr. Quimper shot him, then then set the trap around his leg, snapped the trap around his leg, because then it looked like a hunting accident where he stepped in the trap and he shot himself accidentally, and that's what killed him. But again, I would think any good forensic person would be able to look at that and think it's not.
Particularly if it's bloody, which there was some blood, but it seeped and it wouldn't seem to drain. Well, I don't know.
I don't know. But but this is the same kind of forensics that if you throw a body down an embankment, it's going to leave traces. It's
Yeah.
going to leave quite a few traces. And I would think that if you had somebody come up and shoot someone to make it look like an accident, how are you going to make it look like an accident and then put their leg in the bear trap? And Slack had something to say about that, too. He's looking at this, and then weren't they outlawed like 400 years ago? And
Yeah. And what are you doing, strewing traps around on your property?
again, this is England, and you can do whatever you damn well please on your land if you are a big landowner. And I saw something recently that said that as much as 15% of the land in England is owned behind so many walls of trusts and other legal barriers that you don't actually know who owns it.
A lot of England is privately held by either the crown or large landowners, which I think is one reason why they didn't have the real explosion in suburbs like they did in America.
Well, you couldn't do the sprawl. And we're actually very familiar with that here in Hershey, because when you drive around Hershey, if you don't know who owns a piece of property, if you could guess one of the entities, and we have entities in Hershey, real entities, guess one of the entities and you won't be wrong.
Yeah, it's the Hershey Corporation, the Hershey Trust,
And Hershey Entertainment and Resorts.
right, those three major companies funded by the stock from the Hershey Corporation, and they own about half the land in Derry Township.
Yeah, from just over a third to just about half. I'm not sure exactly what the number is, but it's a lot. This comes back to Luther Krakenthorpe. He owns Rutherford Hall. He is the landowner. He owns it free and clear. And if he wants to set 200-year-old bear traps around his property to keep out poachers, he can.
Good episode, right?
I enjoyed it. I enjoy all the Joan Hicksons, even when they are a bad episode, like The Mirror Cracked with Modern Dance. They're still always watchable. Their low is higher than a lot of other films that we have seen. But this one stands out as being, I thought, really enjoyable. And as long as you don't think too much about, or you think a lot about how Miss Marple came to her solution, and you think, well, the scriptwriter could have done a better job, and he could have. It works.
It still works.
It still worked. It was fun, and there's daring do and heroism and Loesch painters.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the other thing that you had in the introduction?
Buying servants, panting painters, weird wills, and Catholic ballet dancers.
Oh, yes, and that's why Quimper couldn't get a divorce. If he could have quietly divorced his wife, he would have.
Yeah.
But she was a good Catholic, and it was a wartime romance, and they got married in a hurry,
Mm-hmm.
and marry in haste and repent at leisure. And so he was stuck. She wouldn't give him the divorce, and if he wanted to marry the rich heiress and get all the money and get the heiress and live happily ever after, well,
he had to take matters in his own hands,
Yes.
literally.
Yes, and so he strangles
Strangles
his wife and throws her off a train, and you think, boy, there must be better ways than this. But the hardest part of murdering someone isn't the murder. It's not even the hardest part is shutting up afterwards, because there are many people who have successfully shut up afterwards. What do you do with the body? Hiding it in a sarcophagus of dubious antiquity inside of a barn on a huge estate where no one is ever going to go is actually a pretty good solution. No one's going to find the body.
Right. And as we found out, the stone sarcophagus helps keep in the smells.
Yes, because when Lucy pushes it back, she opens up a
face
crypt
full of
and
it.
she gets a face full of it.
Oh. That's right. Well, so this ends another episode of Agatha Christie She Watched.
Thanks for joining us, folks. It's always fun, and we recommend it.
Absolutely, and we'll see you at the movies. Agatha Christie She Watched is Teresa Peschel and Bill Peschel, produced by Bill Peschel. New episodes come out every week wherever you stream your content. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can help support us by going to anchor.fm/mystery and leaving a 5-star rating and review, and by helping to spread the word. To advertise on Mystery She Watched, email Peschel at peschelpress.com. All questions and comments can be emailed to Peschel at peschelpress.com. And thank you for listening.